Hey folks, welcome to Getting Doughy with Joey. My name is Joey Famelli, and this is a series of videos that will take you through my culinary obsession of pizza. This will be about the fundamentals and techniques to help give you a better understanding of the relationship between flour, heat, and water, specifically with a high heat pizza oven. In my case, the Unicoda 16. I have been using high heat pizza ovens over the last several years, and I've learned a lot about how to get consistent results from all sorts of different styles of pizza, and I hope to pass that along to you. Now, this first episode will be one that will probably get me in trouble, and that is the Neapolitan style margherita pizza. That classic Italian thin crust basil cheese sauce pizza. So let's dive right into it. We're gonna start off with the dough here, and this is gonna take several days because it really needs that amount of time to develop flavor and ferment and proof to get the best results. And there are ways to speed this up and using increased yeast and increased starter, but I urge you to actually try this method first so you can get a better understanding of what the dough, the different stages that the dough is going through to give you a really flavorful, very complex dough, much different than your one-day proofing. So if you're gonna be cooking this on the weekend, start this on Tuesday and Wednesday, and it'll be ready by the time you get to the weekend. Now, I use baker's percentages almost exclusively for my recipes. It eliminates the need for cups. There is no 2 cups of water, 3 cups of flour. It is really all about weight in grams. Get yourself a kitchen scale and do it like this because you'll get much more consistent results, but also you'll be able to scale up and down much more easily depending on how much dough you want. It's all really anchored around the flour being 100% and everything else being a part of that. Now, there are a few different ferment methods when it comes to making dough. The two I'll be talking about are sourdough and traditional commercial yeast. I use a sourdough starter. That takes about 15% of my baker's percentage. And on the left here, I have traditional commercial yeast that is scaled to work in about the amount of time it takes for the sourdough to ferment. So these should be on about the same timetable if you use 1/4 teaspoon per 500 gram dough ball. So let's get mixing. I'm gonna be using the sourdough starter recipe for this. And the first thing we wanna do is we wanna mix our wet ingredients, mix our dry ingredients, and then mix our wet and dry ingredients together. So let's start with the water and the sourdough starter. In the water, I will need 228 grams of water mixed with 500 grams of starter, and I will stir those up to mix them well. Now with commercial yeast, you do want to use warm water so that you activate and bring that yeast to life. But that's a different story with ripe sourdough starter. It's already alive and ready to go, and so really it just needs cold or room temperature water when you mix. So Neapolitan dough balls are traditionally about 180 grams to 250 grams. I'm going a little heavy here. I'm doing 300 gram dough balls. It's not traditional, but I like mine a little bit bigger. And with something like the Uni app, there is a calculator in this that lets you specify how many dough balls you want, how much you want them to weigh, and it will give you the percentages that you would need and the numbers in grams for that recipe. So in terms of this pizza dough ingredients, that's pretty much it. We have the water and the starter, we have the flour and the salt, and those will be mixed together, and that will be it. We're not gonna be using olive oil in this. We don't wanna add oils into the dough because, again, we're cooking this extremely high heats very quickly, and this will add to maybe some burning or browning that we don't want. We really want this a very clean pizza that will put us in the best situation to handle that high heat at that speed. Now we're gonna be kneading this dough in a few different stages. Really what we wanna do is build up gluten, let it relax and rest, build it back up, let it relax and rest, and then we'll go and check it. I like to start this with the stand mixer. I think this really helps kickstart that gluten development. And then from there, for the next set of kneads, I use my hands and I really start to feel the dough, and that gives me a better sense of where it's at. But I like to start this off at a low speed and then start to ramp that thing up and go pretty fast. I want that dough to really slap around that bowl and really work that thing in and let that gluten start to develop. Now, a quick note about the flour. I use Caputo Tipo Double O. This is a very soft wheat, very highly milled flour, so it's very fine. There are 2 versions of this. There is the red, more version for pasta, and then there's the blue that's specifically for pizza, and it's kind of made to take in the higher heats. Because we're gonna be cooking on like 700, 800, 900 degree Fahrenheit ovens, we're gonna want a flour that's not gonna burn, or it's not gonna have sort of parts of the wheat berry that is susceptible to heat, like extra malts in that, like natural sugars that tend to sort of char up in ways that we don't want it. We want a very finely milled flour, and that's what the Tipo Double O's will do for us, specifically this flour, the pizzeria version of it. If you don't have this, maybe cut a little pastry flour in there, something really fine to help with the cooking process. You don't want to use like whole wheats that much. or else you might have a little bit of a time burning, especially for this pizza specifically. This pizza is gonna be cooking in like 2 minutes at very high heats. And so we don't want that to burn in ways that we weren't expecting because of that heat. So for consistent results, go for ultra finely milled, go for Tipo 00 when you're making this pizza. All right, so we are 8.5 minutes from the KitchenAid. You can see the dough is much more smooth. It's a little more elastic, but not as elastic as we would like. You see, as I pull it, it just tears apart. That means the gluten isn't anywhere near developed enough for us to be able to stretch this out into an actual pizza. And so we also don't have a great gauge of that right now. It needs to rest. The glutens need to chill out and rest, and you'll see the doughs kind of transform after each sets of resting. Resting is very important in this stage. And so I usually always do 2 sets of kneads and 2 rests and then go from there. So we'll let this sit for 30 minutes, come back and do another set of hand kneading. We're 30 minutes later now, we let the dough rest and we are going to check it out. Now you can see that it has like become more elastic. Like it was not that elastic before we let it rest. Now that the gluten's had a chance to like chill out and rest, the structure is starting to become apparent. But it's not there yet. I mean, we still have a little bit of tear too quickly, so we want to develop more gluten to make that thing stronger. So what we're going to do at this point is just hand knead. Really just like you would knead any dough. If you have a wetter dough, you can do the slap and fold technique, which is really just slapping that dough down and folding it over on itself to give it those folds and to give it a nice violent way of kneading that dough in. But for a 62% hydration dough like this, I like to just use palms and just knead the heck out of that thing. And we're gonna be doing this for about 8 to 10 minutes and then again, letting it rest for another 30. Now, as you're kneading this, you will know that the dough is becoming tight again. You're really tightened with the gluten. We're back at that stage where it's gonna tear very easily. So this is a good example of why you can't really trust the dough at this stage to let you know how much the gluten has developed. You can only really tell where it's at after a nice 30-minute rest for everything to relax. So just knead it 8 to 10 minutes, let that be your guideline, and then come back to it after 30, after it's rested. Now, at this point in the kneading process, you might have the tendency to want to add more flour if it becomes a little bit too sticky for you. If it starts to stick to your hands, to the table, there is a tendency to grab some flour and use that to help alleviate some of that stick, but you do not want to do that. Really, at this point, you don't add any more ingredients to it. You don't want to add any more flour, any more water. You really want to stick with what you made and then just work that until it is workable. Now, this whole slapping and folding, kneading, it'll become more workable, especially as it rests over time. And so just bear with it. You'll learn the techniques to sort of work with wetter doughs, but this one shouldn't be too much of a problem, this 62%. There's not too much stick. So again, just stay clean, stay away from the flour, and just knead, rest, knead, rest. After 8 to 10 minutes, let it rest for another 30 minutes. So there's that second 30-minute rest after that second knead, and you can see that the dough is a lot smoother, a lot more elastic. This feels like it's pretty much ready for the bulk fermentation. Trying the window pane test, you can see that I can stretch this out quite a bit. You really want to be able to see light through it, basically see a little translucent picture on the other side. Yeah, the window pane test really just tells you how strong that gluten is. This is telling me that it is pretty strong and will last, we'll be able to hold up to actually rolling out an entire couple of pizzas with this thing. So at this point, this dough is ready for the bulk fermentation, which is going to be pretty much overnight. I usually do this and just let it sit overnight at room temperature and about 10 to 20 hours, depending on the situation of the temperature of the air, the humidity. There's a bunch of different factors. My sourdough starter might be a little slower than yours or the commercial yeast. So really just overnight, check on it, see if it's doubled in size, and then go on to the next step from there. But for this, I will roll this out into a little ball. I'll use an unfloured surface so it has a little bit of stick to it. And then we want to put this in a glass container, put some saran wrap on it for the bulk fermentation, and then we can move on to the next step. About 13 hours later, my dough has doubled in size and now it is ready for the cold proofing. So to do this, we're gonna divide those dough balls up into the size that we want. In this case, it's 300 grams. Again, Neapolitan style is usually about 250 grams, if not less, but I want bigger dough balls. So 300 grams, put these into individual glass containers, and put them in the fridge for 48 to 72 hours. That fermentation is gonna slow down, but the yeast will continue to eat the sugars of the flour and develop a more complex flavor. So 48 hours later, we have some dough that is ready to go, but it needs to sit at room temperature for about half hour. You don't want to work with cold dough. It's a little bit tough. It'll start to retract back into itself as you start to stretch it. You want it to get to room temperature, but you don't want it to let it go back into fermentation. You don't want it to sit out too long to the point where it starts proofing again. So we're gonna set that to the side, preheat the pizza oven, and then work on our sauce. Now for Neapolitan styles, the sauce is really very, very simple. It's not usually cooked down at all. It's just San Marzano tomatoes taken straight out of the can and blended up with a little bit of olive oil and a touch of salt and pepper. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, you do want to go for the San Marzano, not San Marzano style, and not really any other tomatoes, because this is going to be a highlight of the pizza. The Neapolitan pizza is really just great pizza crust, great sauce, and fresh mozzarella cheese and fresh basil, and that's it. And all those ingredients, those 4 ingredients together, really need to have a balance and harmony and actually be fantastic on their own to really make a good Neapolitan style. So for this tomato sauce, you really just want to pull those whole tomatoes out of the can, strain them out of their juices, put them into a container, give them a little pulse or crush them with your hands, add a touch of olive oil, salt and pepper, and that is pretty much it. No oregano, no dried herbs or anything. It's really just gonna be this. It's that simple, and if you get good tomatoes, it's gonna taste fantastic. If you're not gonna use San Marzano tomatoes and you're gonna go for another can, make sure you buy whole peeled tomatoes. When you start getting into crushed tomatoes or like diced tomatoes, those are sort of the more inferior tomatoes of the harvest. The whole peeled are the best of the bunch that they are using because it is more noticeable. And so the inferior tomatoes often go to those crushed and diced. So avoid those. Go for whole peeled, crush them on your own or pulse them on your own, and they will taste much better. So go ahead and take your dough ball, flour your surface. At this point, it's okay to start using flour, introducing flour to this process because it'll help you stretch this thing out. You want to use your hands. You want to do a full hand roll. You do not want to use a rolling pin or any kind of method that will do what's called degassing the dough and remove all that gas and that air bubbles. You want those air bubbles to really come to life and give it some good oven spring when this thing hits the oven. That will give it a nice, airy, crispy, chewy, but also very light and fluffy crust without having that density from other styles of pizza. The Neapolitan is really all about those big air pockets that give you a really nice, light mouthfeel. Now, 62% hydration for a pizza is pretty low, and the reason behind this is that we are cooking this pizza in 90 seconds. That's not a whole lot of time for the water to evaporate out. So even though it's a much lower hydration than a lot of other pizzas, it's gonna be more moist and more chewy than some of those other ones because that water is going to be retained within that dough. If this was cooking for like 10, 15 minutes, like a New York style or so, we'd be going to like 70%. Sicilian, Detroit styles cook for much longer, and so sometimes they go to 80, 85%. I do 100% Detroits, but for the Neapolitan style, 90-second cook time, we want 62% because that makes sense for that speed in the oven. Here I have mine stretched out to about 12 inches and it is ready to be put onto a pizza peel and go into the oven. Now quickly, let's talk about pizza peels. I use both a wooden and a metal. The wooden is very porous and helps me launch that pizza into the oven. The metal helps me maneuver that thing and hold it into the oven if I need to lift it off the stone. If the bottom's cooking too quickly, I can lift it off and cook it quicker. The metal can tend to stick if you leave the dough on there too long, and so that's why I like to use the wood. The wood always has a little bit more of a slickness to it when it comes to launching that pizza off. You have less of a chance of that sticking to your pizza peel. So if you have a metal pizza peel and you're having problems, try a wooden one and see if that kind of helps the situation. So you want to give your pizza peel a nice lightly dust of flour and then go ahead and start adding in your toppings. Now with the pizza sauce, it's really just enough to give it a nice glue for that cheese. You don't want to overdo it here. If you make this thing too heavy, you're not going to have oven spring and you're not going to have a fluffy pizza. It'll just start to weigh it down and be a little more flat. And so really just enough to give it a light coating. Now here are some fresh mozzarella balls that I have squeezed out as much moisture as I can. I'll just give those a shred. And again, it's about balance here. You don't want to overdo it. This is not a cheese lover's pizza. This is really just giving it a nice accent of this mozzarella on that. And that's pretty much it. So as you see, this is not a whole lot of toppings here. And that's kind of the key. You don't want to overdo this thing with too much toppings. You don't want to weigh it down. 90-second cook time. You want this thing to spring to life and everything to be in a balance, everything sort of working together in the right ratios. That's about it. You can put your fresh basil on now and cook that in the oven, or you can wait like I do and put it on afterwards. But essentially, just give it a little shake, make sure you're ready to launch this thing, and go ahead to the oven and throw it in. When I talk to people that use pizza ovens, the biggest complaint I hear is that they have a hard time cooking the bottom of the pizza. And that is because these pizza ovens need a long time to preheat. I use an infrared thermometer to check the topical heat of the stone, but really you need about 20 minutes to let that heat permeate the entire stone so that when the pizza hits it, it doesn't cool it down immediately. The Unicoda 16 specifically has an L-shaped flame, meaning that it gets very hot in the back left and then it cools down as you get more towards the front right. And so you use that to move the pizza around to sort of gauge and control the cooking speed and temperature of that pizza. Traditional Neapolitan pies usually take about 90 seconds to cook through, but that time may vary based off of your pizza oven. Now, once the stone has reached about 850 and it's been sitting here for about 20 minutes, then I launch that pizza in using that wooden pizza peel and I never take my eyes off of it. After about 45 seconds, I start to rotate it. I start to check the bottom, I start to check the sides, and I move it around that pizza oven to make sure it cooks evenly on all sides. After about 90 seconds of cooking, the bottom looked about done, but the top still needed a little bit of work. So what I did was I used the metal pizza peel to lift that pizza up and hold it towards the top of the oven where it's very hot while keeping the bottom off of that. And I let that cook through for about another 30 to 45 seconds. So in total, this pizza took me about close to 3 minutes to cook after that initial first 45 seconds where a lot of the cooking takes place and the oven spring. There you have it, the Neapolitan style margherita pizza. You can see I got some great leoparding on the side here. Those are those little sort of black circular char marks. I give it some great crunch and texture. The dough is just lightly browned. Again, we don't have oil or like sugars added to this, so you're not gonna get a real brown crust, just like a light brown, a little bit of a paleness to it, but it's all cooked through. The cheese is just melted enough so you don't get those brown kind of burny tough marks. It's just like sort of melted into the sauce, which has just been cooked through. And then you have that nice thin crust interior of the Neapolitan style pizza. Now really all this thing needs is a little bit of basil just thrown on there. You can just tear it with your hands, get a little rustic, or if you want more bite-sized pizzas, go ahead and use a knife. And then I always like to give it a tad bit of olive oil drizzle, just lightly, and then freshly cracked pepper and a pinch of salt. So let's go ahead and show you the underside here. Make sure that's all nicely cooked. Yeah, you got a little bit of char there, nice browning. Yeah, a little bit of crisp. Yeah, so it's super light and airy. It like has that little bit of crisp and crunch on the outside and just a slight tang from that sourdough starter. The crust is just gorgeous. It's just like pillowy and airy is all I can really think of. The tomatoes are a highlight, being that there's a can, but the San Marzano has such a strict regulation on how they approve what can be called San Marzano tomatoes that you're really assured that you're gonna get a nice, great taste from those things, and it's gonna be the highest quality of canning. The mozzarella just adds a great sort of rounding creaminess to all that acid and the tang from the sourdough and from the crust, and then the basil just gives it this bright zip right at the end. It's a really nice light pizza. Like this is a pizza that I would have like before a meal, like share with somebody. There you have it. The Neapolitan style margherita pizza made in a high heat pizza oven. I hope this gave you some great fundamentals on how to not only make this, but sort of make your own. Figure out what kind of pizza you like, because really that's the best kind of pizza, is the one that you like to make. And these guidelines, the baker's percentages, the way in which the heat reacts with the flour and the hydration, that's all great stuff to know when you want to start experimenting and making other kinds of pizzas and seeing what else can be done. So if you can, avoid those very generic recipes that you find online that are just sort of a one pizza dough fits all category, because it's really not. There are so many different ways that you can alter this very slightly and adjust the cooking times and the cooking styles and get all sorts of different kinds of pizzas, including the way you proof your dough and the way you let your stuff ferment. And experiment with all sorts of different kinds of ferments, which I'll get into in a later part of the series. But I hope that helps. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for joining me on this culinary obsession of pizza. And I hope to see you guys next time on Getting Doughy with Joey. Thanks. Bye.